Here we go, everybody. Time to live the dream on this very special 50th edition of the Livin The Dream video podcast. To celebrate, we're here in the Dan Patrick studio with an audience today. Everybody, give yourself a hand. They are here to celebrate episode number 50, the Sid Fernandez edition of the Livin The Dream video podcast. And the reason for that, our honor today to have the man who got us all here, Gus Ramsey, the program director, former coordinating producer of ESPN, four-time Emmy winner. Gus, thanks for being in that seat with us today.
Thank you, Rishi. Thank you for the Sid Fernandez reference. I was looking for a number 50 jersey at home last night. I don't have one. Unfortunately, I have a Super Bowl 50 ring, and I meant to wear it today, and I forgot. So bad producing already out of the gate by me.
Well, you've done so much good producing, we'll let you go. Gus is the one who hired me, and the students you see here today, and many who are also joining on our live Facebook stream and our Zoom stream today. You'll get some questions from all of them today. Should be a fun show, way to celebrate. Hey, I gave up Mike Singletary for you so you could get Sid Fernandez.
I appreciate that.
But we got plenty to talk about with Gus. We're going to go a little longer than usual because he's had an extensive career. God, we could talk for hours about just what he's done here at Full Sail. We won't do that, but what we will do is start at the beginning. Where did the dream of getting into sports broadcasting start for you, Gus?
Well, I think it started where it starts for most of our students, is just loving sports. You know, when I was 6, my friend's grandfather was a minority owner of the Mets, and we went to a bunch of games in 1973, sat right next to the dugout. One day we put on our little Mets uniforms and went down on the field and had our pictures taken with the players, and went into Yogi Berra's office, who was the manager, had our picture taken with Yogi, and the Mets went to that World Series that year. So that was easy, on top of the fact that my dad was a coach and an athletic director. I had 5 siblings. We all played sports. We lived on a school campus with other faculty members and their kids, and we had baseball fields, football fields, the gymnasiums, tennis courts, swimming pool. So, you know, back in the 70s and 80s, kids played outside. So we were outside all the time playing games of some sort. So being around sports and just being competitive was introduced to me at a pretty early age. And then as I got a little bit older, I started paying more and more attention to the people who were talking about it for a living.
Well, I'm sure you had some heroes on the mic as well growing up too. You know, lots to enjoy, whether it be radio or TV, and I know you had that passion for sports based on your background. Who were your heroes when you were young that were broadcasters?
Well, I was so lucky growing up in the shadows of New York City in Greenwich, Connecticut, that we got the New York TV stations. And at that time, you know, Warner Wolf was at CBS, Marv Albert and Len Berman were at NBC, Spencer Christian was at ABC, Bill Mazer was at Channel 5, Jerry Gerard was at Channel 11, and they all had these great personalities, and they all had so much fun talking about sports every night. And this is back in the day, you guys can't relate to this, but to turn the TV channels, there was a dial that we had to literally put our hands on and turn. So when the sports would come on at night, more or less at the same time, I just had my hand on the dial and was always flipping back and forth to find someone who was on and being fun and entertaining. I'll never forget, Mike Stinton will remember it, the Mets had a player named Dave Kingman, who was a big power hitter who played first base and left field, and not terribly well at either one of them. And Jerry Gerard opened his sports broadcast one night by saying, Dave Kingman was attacked by 4 fly balls tonight, but no injuries were reported. And I thought, that's not how sports is supposed to, like, that was amazing to me that he could come out and just make a joke from the start. So that was the big inspiration, was just being able to watch all those super talented people on a daily basis.
You know, when you worked at ESPN, you were around some of your heroes every day. You now are friends with many people who played at the highest level, but back then as a kid, meeting Yogi Berra, meeting some of these other guys, what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, my life has been starstruck in that way. And my mom always used to say that I was dipped in it, meaning that I kind of dipped in gold with my experiences. There was a former Major League player named Dick Stewart who played for the Red Sox and the Pirates, among other teams. He retired and moved to our town and would come to the the campus swimming pool in the summertime and play catch with a tennis ball with me. And I got to talk to him about his experiences and being around the Mets. And then Tom Seaver lived down the street from us. And so, yeah, at an early age to kind of be exposed to those kind of people was, again, made me a little starstruck, but also made me interested in wanting to do more in that space. And then when I'm 12, 1979, ESPN opens up, and it's an hour from my hometown. And I'm like, whoa, there's a 24-hour sports channel, and it's only an hour away? How cool is that? So I was just, at an early age, I was pretty aware of everything that was kind of going on in the sportscasting world.
Well, we're going to get back to Tom Seaver in just a minute, but I know your dad was a big Mets fan as well. What was his influence on you in terms of your love for sports?
Huge. He's the reason I love everything about sports. Again, because at age 6 we were going to the Mets games, but also because he was the athletic director and coached teams at our school. So when I was 6, 7, 8, I would go to his practices and hang around the teams, whether it was baseball, basketball, football, whatever. And in a lot of ways, I was kind of like the mascot, of the basketball team. The older guys, the school that my dad taught at and that I went to, went up through 9th grade. Most schools end after 8th grade. This school went up through 9th grade. So 7th, 8th, and 9th graders were the upper schoolers and varsity sports and those things. So just to be around that and have access to that stuff, as I got a little bit older, I would constantly take his keys and go to the gym and just go in there by myself or with my brother or friends and play basketball all day long, So he was a huge impact. And I remember, I've told this story before, but when I was at ESPN and the Mets and Yankees played in the first Subway series of my lifetime, I had grown up listening to him tell stories about the Dodgers, who he was originally a fan of, and the Yankees and Giants and Yankees Subway series. And I'm down on the field before game 1 of a Mets-Yankees World Series, standing 10 feet from Hall of Fame to-be players taking batting practice. And I called him. I said, guess where I'm standing right now? And thank you for, making me care about this stuff, because it's just been a huge part of my life.
Those players on that day, I'm sure, are larger than life, but that's not the only place you got your inspiration. I see it on your computer with Marvin the Martian, around the holidays with Charlie Brown. I know television also played a big role in your childhood. How have you been able to keep that with you throughout your life?
Yeah, I was one of those guys who school wasn't the thing for me. I was sports, I was music, I was movies, I was TV. It was, I don't know, in the 70s, I think there was this kind of fascination with what is this box and what are these pictures that are coming that we kind of take for granted now. So I think I liked the idea of the creativity of it and the storytelling of it and the joy that you could get from just watching a show that was funny or heartwarming or whatever. And again, being one of 6 kids, there was a lot of competition for the TV. There was a lot of competition for attention and all of those things. So I think I probably learned a lot about how to get attention by what I saw on TV.
And you've paved your path that you have in your life. You're someone who is very much who you are, and that's one of the things I appreciate about you. Growing up with 5 brothers and sisters, that is quite a handful. How did you find your place among that crowd?
By trying to find a way to stand out. I think I learned pretty early in life that I could entertain to some degree, that I could make people laugh. I remember distinctly the first real laugh I got out of my dad and thinking, that was awesome, I want to do that as much as possible. But also my siblings were fun and entertaining too. So as a group, we could do that. And I think it's just, part of it's whatever's in your DNA. My grandmother was a comedy writer for Joan Rivers and Phyllis Diller and some of the most famous female comedians of our time. So I think some of that probably trickled down to me to some degree. And I'll unabashedly say, I like attention. I'm enjoying this today. I like having people listening to me talk. And so I think a lot of it is just kind of innate in that being able to entertain an audience, hopefully to some degree, is something that I get a kick out of. That's why I got into radio when I was young, and that's why I wanted to be on camera at the beginning of my career.
Your mother, Valerie, someone who lived life to its fullest throughout her entire life. What influence did she have on you throughout your time growing up?
Well, I mean, gosh, imagine being a mom of 6 kids, you
Yeah.
know. My little sister was born in March of 70. My brother was born in May of 61. So there's 6 kids basically being born in the 60s. So imagine how many diapers, how much laundry, how many dinners and all of that she had to do every single day. So if you can't be inspired by someone like that. But after we all got older and left the nest, so to speak, she went out, they were living in Pebble Beach at the time. She went over to Pebble Beach Golf Club and took a job in the pro shop, you know, at age 60, working with the college kids because she wanted to do something new and challenging in her life. And it was there that some guy from Hollywood came down and thought she would make a great model. And at age 62, she started modeling. And she modeled, you know, into her 80s. And she was a spokesperson for the American Heart Association. And so, you know, just someone who's willing to say, I don't know what's next, but let's go find it and do something with it. So at the very least, when I got let go at ESPN, I had someone to look to and go, just because something's over and you don't know what's next doesn't mean it isn't going to be awesome. So she was a huge impact on me.
That's Gus Ramsey. He is the program director here at the Dan Patrick School of Sportscasting at Full Sail University. You had family and you had friends. One guy who's pretty high profile these days, started The Ringer, runs that. He also, you know, the sports guy on ESPN. We're talking about Bill Simmons, and I understand that through your father and being the head of admissions at the school you went to, that's kind of how that friendship started?
Yeah, so I was a 9th grader and Bill was an incoming 7th grader, and his mom and stepdad had just moved down to Stamford, Connecticut from Boston, and they were looking at Greenwich Country Day School. And so my dad, as head of admissions, would interview the parents. And so he says to me, hey, I've got this family coming in and the son likes to play basketball. Could you take him to the gym and shoot hoops with him while I'm talking to the parents? Sure, whatever. And that was Bill. And so we became great friends, and my dad taught him and coached him when he was in the upper school at Country Day, 8th and 9th grade. The first paper that Bill ever wrote for my dad graded it, gave him 100, and at the bottom wrote, someday when you're a famous sports writer, I want 10%. So when Bill sold The Ringer to Spotify for $184 million, I said, do you think that paper's legally binding? Can we get 10% of that? But yeah, Bill and I spent we went to the same high school, so we spent a lot of time together during those years. I did a little pirate radio in my day, and Bill would come over. This guy I knew was a couple years older than me. He had all the equipment for a 10-watt radio station, which, you know, could barely broadcast out of this room, except when you're on AM, when the AM signal can travel, you know, as far as the sky will let it. And so he was doing this DJing stuff from my dad's classroom in the summertime. And so when he wasn't in there, I would go in there and I would DJ a bunch. And then Bill sometimes would come over and we'd do our best morphing of Mike and the Mad Dog and Howard Stern, you know. And we thought we were wildly entertaining on the radio. But we always thought that someday, like, we were going to have a radio show together. But we also always thought, because he was a writer, and I was more of the on the microphone guy, that I would be the person, you know, in front of the camera, and he would be the behind the scenes guy, and then it completely flipped.
Well, it's interesting how things progress, and you never know who in your life is going to end up being someone who stands out to other people too, just as you have during your time at ESPN and during your time here. I know you went to games with Bill. I remember you sent me a picture of you at the Broncos game. What was it like going just with a friend as a kid and getting to see your athletes that you cared so much about like that?
Yeah, that was the last year of Mile High Stadium. I'd never been to an NFL game. Growing up in Connecticut, you know, being a Broncos fan, I had no desire to go watch the Jets or Giants play. Sorry, Mike. But I was like, I got to go to a game at Mile High before they close it. So I called Bill and I'm like, hey, you want to go with me out to Denver to see a game? They were playing the Jaguars. And Sterling Sharp was at ESPN, and one of my friends was very good friends with him. I'm like, do you think you could ask Sterling if Shannon will give him a couple tickets? So we got a couple tickets from Shannon, and we flew out there, and it was a cool experience to go to Mile High Stadium. It's one of those places where, you know, it'd be like if Soldier Field was in its last year and you'd never been, you're going to want to go. So we went out there, and it was the 8th game of the year, and Terrell Davis crossed the 1,000-yard mark in that game on his way to his 2,000-yard season, and the Broncos rolled. And so again, growing up in Connecticut and always kind of watching it on TV and always seeing like, God, Denver just seems like in October, looks like an amazing place to be. So that was a cool opportunity to get to do that.
Well, if you've ever met Gus, you know he's a diehard Broncos fan, you know he's a diehard Mets fan, and you know that he's very, very tall. So not surprising that basketball was a sport that you were drawn to, and I understand you were pretty good at it growing up.
Yeah, I was good. Again, I think because I started young, and my brother is 6'7", right? So we're constantly playing one-on-one in the driveway, and I'm at a disadvantage. So that actually helped me in my career. But I played for my dad 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. When I left Greenwich Country Day School, I was the all-time leading scorer. And I had the great opportunity last winter to meet Donovan Mitchell, who also went to Greenwich Country Day. And I asked him, I said, "You think you broke my record?" And he said, "Maybe by a little bit." And then I went to high school, and I started all 3 years at high school, was an all-star all 3 years, and we won a league championship my senior year. So it's funny, baseball's my love, but I was a better basketball player. But similar to what we do in our industry, just being a part of teams was the cool thing for me. I played 1 year of football, I played 1 year of soccer, I played a bunch of baseball. You know, I never took to the individual sports because I just liked that team aspect of it. And I think that's why most of the students who will have success when they get out there is because they've played sports and they know the dynamic that you have to have for a team to be successful. We have that here with our staff, right? And so that doesn't mean you can't be a golfer or a tennis player or whatever and go do well in this business too, but I think understanding that the team dynamic is really important, and again, being around it from the jump, I think really helped me.
Well, in your 1 year of football, you faced off against a guy who you one day would cheer for as a New York Met, Mo Vaughn.
Yeah.
What's it like staring him down coming across from you while you're playing quarterback?
Terrifying. He was 9th grade, and I had played against him in baseball. He had hit me right in the back with a pitch in baseball. In basketball, we had a couple great games, and one time, I can't prove it, but I think he punched me in the stomach on a jump ball. And then football, he was in 9th grade. He must have been like 6'2", 220 already in 9th grade. He was huge. And he ran me down from behind and sacked me, and he fell on top of me, and I fell right on the ball. And I don't know why they don't talk about this more on broadcast, but when you get the wind knocked out of you, like that's the closest to death I think you actually ever come in life. And having him powell on top of me was not fun, but then being able to track his career after that and see all the success that he had was pretty cool. Always fun to be able to go, I played against that guy.
Yeah, he turned out to be just fine.
Yeah.
Great player. Was he a former MVP American League with the Red Sox?
I think he may have been, yeah.
Yeah, I think he was. Students that are here, if anybody wants to ask any questions, we're going to get to that in just a minute. Same goes with those on the online chat. I see some of you are here enjoying it, so you can drop your questions in the chat. We'll do this a few different times during the show today here in the early section. And Gus has lived a couple of dreams, so we'll get to all of that later as well. But it wasn't just sports for you. You were involved in theater, and you mentioned liking to have attention on you. I'm sure you got that during your time acting.
Well, here's the great part about plays. Nobody ever boos, right? Or at least you have to be really, really bad or incredibly offensive to get booed at the end of a play. You can play sports and not everybody cheer for you, right? You can be on the losing team. They're not going to boo, most likely, but you're not going to get applause. And so to do a play and come out at the end and take your bow and have everybody cheering, it was pretty cool. On top of, again, it's a team environment. Like everybody works long and hard hours to put on this performance that you hope goes well. I was in Greece. I had a solo. I can't sing to save my life, you know, but I put my little comedic spin on the song and tried to make it work. And I just love the idea of we're all working together to create and present this thing that hopefully people like. So being a part of the theater, again, I'm not shy, and I like to get out there and try stuff. And I went to Rollins as a theater major originally, and then found that college theater was a little too theatery for me, and so I switched over to English. But I love everything about it. I love going to shows and seeing live productions and all of that.
How did that help you once you got into broadcasting?
Yeah, again, it's just that sense of not being shy and understanding that there's an audience out there and you're trying to entertain them, and you have to ratchet it up. And even if you're playing a character or if you're hosting a show, there's an audience that has an expectation to be entertained, and you have to find a way to do it.
Well, you decided to go to Rollins. I know you had family members that went there, and at first I know that you had hopes of playing basketball there. What were the early days of the Rollins experience like for you?
Yeah, like most people, going off to college was a little terrifying. I was lucky in that my best friend from 7th, 8th, and 9th grade was going to Rollins also. So we ended up rooming together, and I had seen the campus before because my brother went there, and I found out about it because my parents met there. And once you see the campus, you're like, all right, if I got to go to college somewhere, this seems like a pretty good place to go. And plus it was here, and I had lived in Connecticut my whole life. But the idea of now being on my own and all that was a little bit scary. And then I was hoping to walk on to the basketball team. And I don't know if they still have captain's practices, but they used to back then, where the coaches couldn't be around. So the team could start practicing like in late September, early October. So here I am, a freshman, walk on. Nobody knows me at all. So I show up for a couple of days, and basically while 9 guys were playing basketball, I was running up and down the floor getting exercise. But it was like, no one's going to pass me the ball. No one cares that I'm here. And at that particular point in my life, I needed a little bit of a pat on the back and someone just going, it's going to be okay, just hang in there. And we didn't have cell phones. I couldn't FaceTime my dad every day and get that reassurance. You're lucky if you made 1 phone call a week back then. So, admittedly, there is a little bit of a quitter bone in me. If things get a little bit tough, I don't mind going, I can do something else. And I did have student loans that I knew I was going to have to pay off, and I had to do student work hours and all that. So it's like, well, if this basketball thing isn't going to go the way I hoped it was going to go, I've got other things I could do. So I immediately went over to WPRK, the radio station at Rollins, and introduced myself to the guy who ran the station and said I'd love to do my work-study hours here, if possible, as well as I'd like to call games and maybe DJ and whatever you got for me. So it did, walking away from basketball, if nothing else, accelerated my path towards starting to do the broadcasting stuff. The work study is kind of a fun story that no one here is going to appreciate, but I'll tell it anyway. The station played a lot of classical music back in the day on records. And if you don't know, on records, if they got a little scratch in them, it would skip. So my work study hours, I would go into the back room and take a Bach, a Beethoven, whatever, and I'd have to sit there and listen to the record to see if it had any scratches on it, to make sure it was still airable. So I would sit in there for like 2 hours, and that's when I would write letters to Bill Simmons, and he and I would write, remember Larry King would have those stream of consciousness columns? I would write this kind of thing. Things I'm thinking about while listening to Bach's 18th Overture. Right? Why was Bugs Bunny so dumb, so smart, and stuff like that. So that was a tough way to get some work study hours done, but you have to do what you have to do.
How surreal was it when you came here and now you're teaching everybody who's here in the audience how to broadcast Rollins games when you have firsthand experience of doing that? Yeah,
I mean, they're so much better set up for success than I was. The only thing I knew about broadcasting was what I had watched on TV. Here's a great one. In 1980, the last week of the NFL season, the Jets and Dolphins were both out of the playoffs. And so either as a stunt for ratings, or Don Ohlmeyer, the head of NBC Sports at the time, must have had a contract dispute with a play-by-play guy and wanted to prove to him that they weren't necessary. NBC broadcast the Jets-Dolphins game with no broadcasters. All you heard over the TV was the sound from the stadium. So knowing that they were going to do this, I got the rosters out of the paper, I got my tape recorder, and I sat in my living room and I broadcast an NFL game, in my house. So the idea of doing it was something that wasn't foreign to me. I was excited to want to do it, but no one there told me anything about how to do it. The guy who ran the station was an old news reporter. He didn't know anything about sports. There were 2 seniors who were very territorial, and they gave me the soccer games, which I knew nothing about. I'm sure if I had tapes of that, it would all be terrible. And then when I did basketball or baseball, a lot of it was just mimicking people who I had listened to call games. Marv Albert, calling the Knicks games when I was growing up. The great Mets broadcasters that I listened to. Even the Yankees broadcast team was tremendous when I was a kid. So a lot of it was just kind of taking what I learned from them and doing kind of what I felt natural. But no one prepared me in it. I didn't have a game board. You know, my research was just knowing the athletes on the team from being in the same class with them, maybe, or something like that.
Something.
But it was a far cry from what we're able to do with our students today.
Well, you said you came as a theater major. When did you start to shift your focus in terms of, hey, I might be going in a different direction?
Probably fall term of freshman year. For starters, I had 2 English classes and 2 history classes, and that was more reading than anybody should ever be asked to do in their entire life. So classes were way on top of me, and I quickly saw that I wasn't going to have time to do some of that theater stuff that they were going to ask, because that's a lot of hours when you get involved in the theater. And really, it was a nice idea, but I don't know that it was necessarily the right idea. And if nothing else, I knew, like, I'm not going to go be an actor. I'm not going to be on Broadway someday. At least with English, it's generic enough that if I want to get into broadcasting, it's not going to hold me back.
Well, that's great. That's Gus Ramsey. He is a 4-time Emmy Award winner and now the program director here at the Dan Patrick School of Sportscasting. Gus, how did you get the opportunity that began your career, really, at WESH?
My brother had done an internship when he was at Rollins. He graduated the year before I went to Rollins. And so I remember him mentioning it. So spring term of my senior year at Rollins, I'm like, all right, I guess I got to do something to get this started. We didn't have career development. We didn't have anybody telling us, like, here, you want to do this? These are the people you need to go talk to. So I drove down to WESH. I knocked on the door. I said, can I talk to the sports guys? They're like, yeah, hold on. They went and got the sports guy, Mark Middleton, and Buddy Pittman was there too. And I somehow convinced them. Those 2 guys, Mark had never had an intern before. And so he was very reluctant to have them. Mostly he thought they were just people who sat around and got in the way. But I think after talking to me, he saw my passion for sports and for sports broadcasting. So they brought me on, and I finished up, and I graduated Rollins, and then I just stayed. I was like, no one's told me to leave. I'm not going to leave. And I ended up working there for free for 9 months. I didn't necessarily care because I was in the door, and those guys were giving me all kinds of great opportunities. Eventually, I got to do a live shot from a Rollins baseball game. Buddy, the weekend guy, was off on Mondays and Tuesdays. So I would go out with the photog and shoot packages and stuff, and I'd do my own stand-up and then would bring the material back to Mark so he could make a package out of it. But I had something, you know, that I could put on my reel eventually.
At a basketball camp, it doesn't much matter if you can't shoot, rebound, or pass. What it all boils down to is it's the shoe that makes the man. The other part of the caravan is the workshop, and that's where Roy Conrad plays batmaker to the stars. It's here Conrad demonstrates how he customizes bats for the big league's big sticks, and he takes pride in knowing that the game's top hitters rely on his superb craftsmanship.
Times when I work with a player, he might have a blister on the heel of his hand, and it's because of a hump or a curve in the bat, and we can resolve that, and it makes him feel comfortable with the bat. And I like to feel that I've had a small part of his coming around and start getting the hits and getting out of his slump.
Mark went with the Magic to Indiana when one year the Magic played the Pacers in the playoffs. Yeah. Buddy was off, but Mark used to, after the 11 o'clock news, would tape a sports segment to run on the Sunrise show. Mark was out of town, so I got to tape those things. So they gave me a lot of experiences. I was there the first year that the Magic started. I got to go to pretty much every Magic game and go into the locker room afterwards and interview the players. So it wasn't just getting coffee when they needed it or logging tapes. I did a lot of stuff that really whet my appetite for this opportunity, but eventually I also needed to work and be paid for it. I went and worked with a DJ company, and so on the weekends I would go to weddings and bar mitzvahs and stuff like that all over Central Florida, DJing at those things to make a little bit of money. I was living with a photog friend of mine who at the time wasn't together with his wife, and they decided to get back together. He had to kick me out. I had nowhere to go. Turns out there was a room in my fraternity house at Rollins, which we started that fraternity my spring of my junior year and then my senior year. We created a fraternity from scratch, basically, and we got our letter so we could be a fraternity, and then after I graduated, they got a fraternity house. Well, somebody moved out. So here I am, the conquering hero who's working in television moving back onto campus.
Yeah, but you started the fraternity. You should be able to live there for free for
Yeah,
life
if
if you want
nothing
to,
else,
right?
hey, drop and give me 20 because I'm a founding father kind of thing. But my wife-to-be was a senior at the time. So I lived in the fraternity house and I ate off of my wife's meal card that her father paid like the highest amount that you can get. So I was living the high life there for a little while. But eventually the news director came to me and said, "Are we not paying you?" And I said, "No." And he said, "That's illegal." And I said, "Well, then pay me." And they made me a production assistant, and eventually I got the weekend producer job.
That's awesome. And I saw, you showed me some of your clips of when you worked at WESH. The first thing that comes to mind is these guys had fun and they were creative. How did that kind of tunnel vision your path toward, okay, I want to connect with an audience here?
Yeah, it was funny. I think, because Mark was pretty straight-laced, I think a lot of the fun stuff we did was stuff that I pushed him to. But the fact that he was willing to do it too, like I think you can't take yourself too seriously when you're the sports guy, because the A and the B block is news and most of it's bad, right? And the weather is the weather. So they look to sports to have a little bit of fun. So we did a piece back then in the early 90s. Every news station had an investigative unit, the I-team kind of thing. So it was the day before the All-Star game, or maybe the day of the All-Star game, which is the slowest day in the history of sports, right? When you work in television, the 2 worst days. Now they have the home run derby at least, right, the day before. But the All-Star break in baseball, there's nothing going on. So the American League, I think it was, had won 12 consecutive All-Star games. So I said, let's do an investigative piece that it's fixed and that somewhere, some point, they decided that the National League is never going to win another game. So we went out there and did an investigative piece on that. And we, again, this is where watching the television comes in. Back in the day, those investigative shows, there was always an informant guy who was the shoe shine guy, and you go give him $10 to get the information. So we went downtown Orlando and we faked this whole thing. And the investigative units always used to do these swish pans. So I had our photog take his camera and 3 consecutive 360s in a row to use as a swish pan as pure silliness. Our camera was this big old camera, and we're like, we tucked this in our hidden camera in our gym bag. The camera is sticking out of the bag, but we're carrying it around like no one would know there's a camera in there. So the idea of like, we're here to do something fun today, let's go do it. So we had a lot of fun, and a lot of it was just for us. And if the people at home laughed, so be it. When Horace Grant was a free agent, the Magic brought him into town to interview, and they told all the stations, there's not going to be any media availability. Don't even come out here. Don't try. We're not making him available. Well, that's how they used to do it back in the day. Nobody got him. Like we all knew that, but we also knew every station watches every station to see what they have, kind of thing. So we bumped coming up our exclusive interview with Horace Grant, because we knew that the other 2 stations were going to freak out as they were getting ready to do their sportscast. And then what we did is we just had a guy at the station. Conan O'Brien used to do a bit where he would interview people and he would just have a picture of their face and cut out their mouth and somebody would talk. So we just got a guy at the station and he was the talking mouth for Horace Grant's picture in the monitor behind us. And it was totally stupid, but we knew that Channel 6 and Channel 9 were freaking out for 2 minutes thinking we had got an exclusive with Horace Grant. So sometimes you just do stuff to make yourself laugh.
That's why Gus says embrace the stupid. Go all in on it,
100%,
right?
Yes.
Well, eventually a guy who is known to be pretty entertaining joined the staff at WESH in the sports department, Stuart Scott. Yeah. How did that kind of change the course of your life in a wild way?
Well, 2 ways, right? So I wanted to be on air at the time. I was doing stuff regularly to put on my demo reel. I'd done a little bit of on-air work at that point. And the station decided to hire a 3rd sports guy. And I'm like, great, I'm here. Give me a shot. If I suck, it hasn't cost you any money, then you can go out and find somebody. The news director had just left to go to North Carolina. Mark and Buddy were both very much in favor of giving me a shot. They took it upstairs to the station general manager, who said, we're not a starter job. At the time, Orlando was the 21st market in the country. He said, no, we're going to hire someone with experience. So they hired Stuart, who was a news reporter in Raleigh at the time. So, my first reaction was, that bastard stole my job, who is he to come down here or whatever. But from the jump, he was ridiculously nice. The very first day he worked, at the end of the day, I'm like, you want to go get some dinner? He's like, sure, great. I said, there's a Pizza Hut right down the street. You want to go there? Great, let's go to Pizza Hut. We sit down, we order. He tells the guy, no cheese on his pizza. I'm like, no cheese on your pizza? He's like, I don't like cheese. I'm like, then why did we come to Pizza Hut? He's like, it seemed like you really wanted to go. So like that was the kind of person he was. We ended up living in the same apartment complex and spending a lot of free time together. So in that moment, it was like, well, if I am going to be a sportscaster, it's probably not going to happen here. But then after 2 years, he left. He went to ESPN. And probably about a year after that, the Golf Channel started. And they hired a bunch of people from Bristol to go work down here. And so a producer job came opening, and Stuart let me know that there was one and put in a good word for me. And he said, you can easily come up here and produce. And at that time, they had taken me out of sports altogether. I was producing the new news, booking cooking segments and furry pet segments and all this stuff that I wanted no part of doing. And I'm like, all right, this is probably the time to get out. I had started sending my tape to Fort Myers and Palm Beach, smaller markets in Florida. But back then, you literally had to take a tape, put it in the mail, send it to a station and with your information and hope someone got back to you. There was no cell phones. There wasn't even email, like to reach out to the news director. So it was kind of a wing and a prayer kind of situation. And again, I mentioned I got a little bit of a quitter bone in me. And then it was like, all right, so ESPN wants me to go produce SportsCenter. I don't know if I'm going to hear back from these other stations. So if I wait any longer, ESPN's going to move on. And this could be the one and only time that I'm going to get a chance to go there. And I was probably done with Florida at that time, being from the Northeast. I liked the seasons and all that. I was kind of tired of sunny and 90 and humid most of the days. So going back to Connecticut was appealing, but it was definitely one of those crossroads. And again, but because of Stuart, I had that opportunity. And that's why the networking thing is so important, right? I joke about like, I had to get over Stuart ruining my life, but the reality of it is as best as you can, and we're not all good at it, myself included, the better you can be with people, the better you can treat people, the more likely it's going to come back for you at some point. Even when I left ESPN, I could have blown that bridge to smithereens if I wanted to, not knowing what was going to happen next. I didn't, and I'm really grateful now because I need ESPN to hire people from our program, right? So being good to Stuart and not holding a grudge and becoming good friends with him 100% led me to get that job at ESPN. They weren't convinced that I could be a producer there, and Stuart's like, he'll do that easy, So he was a huge part of my success and my career path.
Yeah, and you did the news producing work at WESH, but as you had mentioned earlier, you had met your wife, Jackie, and as any man knows, finding a good woman, now your life is going to change, right? So you and her went up to Bristol, but how did meeting her influence kind of where your life headed to?
Yeah, well, meeting in college, and again, in high school, I was the captain of the Let's Just Be Friends Club, right? So to think that there was any woman out there who found me attractive and might actually consider spending significant time with me was pretty shocking. So I was like, well, she might be the one and the only, so I better hang on to this one. But she's from Miami, so I was telling this story before we taped today. She wanted no part of moving to Bristol, Connecticut, and I got the job in December '94. She actually didn't come up until April. She skipped the first winter, one to avoid winter, but also because I think she was just wrestling with, is this really where I want to go live my life? And we've had students, who've lost partners because of where this job is going to take you, the hours you're going to work, and how drastic of a not 9 to 5 kind of lifestyle you're going to lead. And it's not for everyone. Right. But thankfully, she saw that I did bring some value to the table as a human being. And ironically, it didn't snow at all the winter that she missed.
All right.
And then her first winter in Connecticut, we had over 100 inches.
Oh, God.
Set the state record for snowfall. I'm like, well, if you can get through that, you can pretty much get through anything. But my first show at ESPN came on at 2:30 in the morning. She worked 9 to 5. I was leaving when she was coming home. And that's strenuous.
Yeah.
You know, you want to see your partner, even on the weekends. I'm tired, you know, when she's not and whatever. So it was challenging, and I'll always be grateful to her for her patience with me in a lot of ways.
Still happily married. He's here now, back in Florida, after he said he'd never be back again, but here he is. We're glad to have him. We're so glad to have him. But now, you're at ESPN. What was it like to live that dream?
Terrifying. Like, you know, producing the news here in Orlando, we have 9 counties, 10 counties, something like that in the WESH broadcast area. So it's a big broadcast area for a local TV station, but in the grand scheme of things, you're pretty much focused on only a few parts of town. So now to go to ESPN and think like, oh, man, I got to pay attention to everything. I got to know about the NHL, which I don't really follow. I got to know about soccer, which I know nothing about. Auto racing, all these things. You're like, this is gigantic, and I'm going to drown up there. You quickly realize that there are people in the building who work on your show who know the stuff that you don't know. And again, it being such a team effort, you lean on those people and go, well, if they say that this is a super important soccer game, it must be a super important soccer game, so we're going to put it in the show. Thankfully, you know, producing news, I produced half-hour shows, so now to produce an hour show wasn't like a big jump. It's not hard to fill up a rundown most days because there's so much stuff going on. So it was really just about kind of learning the ESPN language, understanding talent in a way I didn't really have to understand in local news, like having guys come up to me and be like, John's got 8 highlights, I only have 4.
Yeah, sure.
Or I'm not on camera after the bees, like things that I had never had to think about before that now you have to do. There was someone there who I think probably thought they were going to get the producer job and didn't like me at all. I think primarily because
You got the job?
I took his job the way Stuart took mine, right, kind of thing. So you run into that. But you also, like the cool thing is I'm now producing a show that my friends and family can see.
Yeah.
Like my dad can see my work every day now. Now, obviously now we stream newscasts and whatever, and if Janir in Nashville is doing a show and her mom in Florida wants to watch it, she can. But back then, no one could see my work at WESH. So now to be like, I'm doing a show for the whole country, and not just a show, I'm doing SportsCenter.
Amazing.
Which at the time is the unrivaled, there is no other competition sports show in the country. CNN had a show, but like they were AA compared to us, you know, major league stuff. So to know that now it's like, all right, now we're big time, now we're playing in the major leagues, this is pretty cool.
That's Gus Ramsey. He was a producer at ESPN, then was promoted to coordinating producer, where he served for 15 years. There, student audience, if you guys have got any questions about ESPN and Gus's time there, feel free to jump up to the mic. Same goes with our audience joining us through the live Zoom at this point. You mentioned your family being able to watch your shows. What was their reaction to you and your new life back closer to home?
Yeah, it was. They were thrilled. Obviously, my folks had moved out to California at that time, so that was at least one way to kind of connect. That I knew that they were watching, or at least my dad was, and my family members and friends from high school or whatever. Like, I don't know that I thought about it much at the time, but in later years, moving back down here, seeing friends from Rollins, and they're being like, dude, you produced SportsCenter at the end of the 90s, you realize that it was, probably one of the top 5 kind of staples of Americana back then, and certainly a sports fan's life. It was appointment viewing.
Yeah, sure.
Before I got there, it was appointment viewing. I wouldn't leave the house at 6 o'clock because SportsCenter was coming on. When I was at Rollins, my friends and I would stay up for the 2:30 a.m. show, and their tease animation always, before they rolled the tease, it always kind of sat like in a frozen frame for a second, with just this like little blue light in the upper left hand. And my friend were like, you want to stay up for the blue light tonight? Like, it was the blue light edition of SportsCenter. So I always equated to, in Field of Dreams, when the doctor has gone back to being Moonlight Graham, the baseball player, and the daughter falls off, and he has to decide, if I step off the field, I can't ever go back. And I remember kind of walking in the door at the first day and being like, I'm never going to watch SportsCenter the same way again. this show that I love, that has been such a big part of my life, I'm now going to see it from the other side. I'll never be able to unsee that. Obviously, the trade-off is, okay, but you're going to get to go do it, so you do it. But I do recall having that thought.
How was it different being inside the building than maybe what your expectations were?
It was a little, not quite as chaotic as I thought. You know, it was, when I got there in '94, they'd been around for 15 years. So they had kind of figured it out by then. But what was cool was it was still kind of mom and pop feeling. And coming from a local news station where I worked on weekends, we had 6 people working in the station on the weekends down here. When I'm doing the 2:30 a.m. show, most people have gone home, so it was still kind of a small crew of people. It still felt kind of local in that way. But people are professional. You know, things are buttoned up. I do remember though, my first week there, someone was walking me around, kind of showing me around. A guy named Chris Martens, who Mike will remember. He says, don't trust anybody to do their job. And that's the worst piece of advice I've ever been given. It's like, I gotta have to worry about me. Now I have to worry about all these other people. How am I supposed to do that? And I quickly learned, like, you check in on people, you make sure people are comfortable with what you're asking them to do, you communicate, but at some point I do have to trust you to do your job. And that was probably the biggest change, going from a weekend newscast where there's 6 people to now doing a sports center where there's 40 or 50 and hoping everybody's on point today. And not always going to be that way, oftentimes isn't, but just that idea that it's a huge machine and every person is a big part of trying to make sure that this goes home smoothly.
When did you start to gain your confidence that, hey, I can do this?
Probably after about a year. I tell our grads all the time, like, whatever job you go do, I think you have to be there for a year to do that one lap around, to kind of go, all right, this is what we do when we get to the Masters, this is what we do with the Final Four, whatever. So it's probably about a year of doing that show. Now, the 2:30 show was only a half-an-hour show, but in the summer of '95, so I've been there 6 months, they take me off that show and they put me on the 6 o'clock Sports Center. And the hosts on the 6 o'clock Sports Center were Bob Lee, Robin Roberts, Charlie Steiner, and Jack Edwards, some combination of those people. And that was really intimidating because those were more news sports people than they were just regular sports people. And they were more journalists. And so most days I would go home after doing the 6 and have a half a bottle of Tums. Because it was super stressful, plus all the bosses are in the building. So there was constantly people coming over and looking at the rundown and questioning why you have this here and that there, or telling you, we need to put this in the show and whatever. And I'm still a relatively inexperienced producer at that time. Doing the 2:30 show was difficult from the standpoint that it re-aired the next day. SportsCenter didn't used to have live shows in the morning, so that half-hour show would play throughout the morning the next day. So if anything went wrong, we'd fix it. So sometimes you're there till 3:30, 4 in the morning doing fixes. But at least you go, all right, the final product looks good. A live 6 o'clock show starts at 6, it ends at 7. There was one, that summer we came on, ESPN had the World Cup, the yacht racing stuff.
Oh, yeah.
America's Cup. So now we're following a yacht race. It's not like a basketball game where you go 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter. It's like they just went around the third buoy. Yeah. Okay, what does that mean we're going on?
I don't know.
Right? So maybe we get on at 6:18, and now you're collapsing that show to still get off at 7. So that was super stressful. Then they expanded the overnight show back to an hour, and they put me on that before I found my way to the 11. But it took a year just to kind of feel good, but then there were other mile markers along the way where it's like, oh, this is a new challenge. Let's see how this goes.
Well, you ran into all kinds of celebrities and sports people there while you were there every day.
Having the producer in your ear, like Gus Ramsey, that would just say, you're doing a horrible job, Ken. You're to go to break. This couldn't be worse, Ken. Thanks, Gus. And I'm ignoring Gus. It's really bad. This is the worst thing I've ever seen. And I would rather have a dog anchor Sports Center. Okay, we'll be right back. That was because the mic was not supposed to be. You weren't supposed to hear that part. That was an accident. Gus did say a lot of that was off the record. He pressed it wrong, but that's why he did apologize.
What's the most memorable experience you had meeting a celebrity while working there?
Well, the bias in me, well, David Wright was there one day, and Mike will tell you, like we were told, don't ever go up to these guys and ask for autographs. But I had a David Wright baseball card that I snuck in there and got him to sign for my son. You know, we were taping the This Is Sports Center commercials all the time. I walked in the lobby one day and there was Grant Hill sitting at a baby grand piano. I'm like, okay, whatever. I remember I did 6 months on Sports Nation, and Gronk came and was a special guest on Sports Nation. And we came up with a bit called Will It Break? And we were going to have Gronk spike stuff. And Colin Cowherd and Michelle Beadle had to guess beforehand whether or not it was going to break. We had 3 meetings throughout the day on what it was he was going to spike. I wanted him to spike a bowling ball because I thought it was like caveman breaks rock kind of thing. And they were like, no, because there's going to be people there could be shrapnel from the bowling ball. So we did like a milk carton, which some people thought wasn't going to break for some reason, but of course it did. We did a watermelon and something else, but that was just the nature of the beast there. But even down here, Stuart and I went and we interviewed Muhammad Ali one time when he came into town. I got an exclusive interview with Davey Johnson when he got fired by the Mets. He had a bar in New Smyrna Beach, and we had heard he'd come back after the Mets fired him, and my photog and I ran out there and got an interview with him.
Oh, that's great.
Being around the Magic, I was here for the beginning of Shaq's rookie year. We had the 3rd Royal Rumble was here in Orlando, and I convinced Mark to let me go down and interview the Macho Man, which was the greatest interview I ever did. I think I just said, Macho, are you excited? And then I held the mic for 5 minutes as he cut a promo. So I had a little bit of a taste of it. So going up to ESPN, it was still cool though. And then they started giving me stuff to do that I never even did at ESPN. I did the Daytona 500. I never went, 4 years at WESH, I never went to the Daytona 500, even though the station was out there for every single race. But I'm there, my first one, Dale Earnhardt wins his first Daytona 500. And then comes into our little studio there and basically is our guest for a half an hour with Kenny Mayne. So it's really about these experiences that you're now being afforded the opportunity. You know, eventually when I got to Baseball Tonight, going to World Series, going to Final Fours, going to the Olympics. You know, these are things that you don't think about when you go just to produce a studio show, but it's also the value of going to a place like that, because once you get people's attention, they're going to tap you on the shoulder and go, this is a big deal, we'd like you to be a part of it.
Well, I know the remotes were some of your favorite experiences there, but one that I know you'll never forget was in Atlanta when there was the bombing in the Olympic Village. You were there during that, broadcasting during that. Take us through what that experience was like for you.
It was funny because it was getting later into the Olympics at that time, and that's a long event to be on the road at, right?
Yeah.
So they had gotten us these condos not too far from downtown Atlanta. Basically, people said, yeah, we'll let you rent our condo for probably 10 times more than we should. We'll get out of town. I was doing the overnight stuff, and another guy was doing the daytime stuff. But it was kind of like the same old, because we had no access to the event. We're not a rights holder, so we're not interviewing. When we interview an athlete, we have to meet them like in a parking lot somewhere. We can't interview them at the venues. We can't show any video. So it's a bit of a grind.
Yeah.
That particular day, I had gotten tickets for me and 3 other guys, including Jeff Schetzel, to go see Lithuania basketball play, because I was a huge Arvydas Sabonis fan. Wow. And so Lithuania was playing Mexico, and we got tickets. The game was in the Georgia Dome. We went to the game, had a great time, and then come in to work. And we were taping a segment for the overnight Sports Center about 1:20 in the morning. We're in our production truck, which is basically an 18-wheeler, in the parking lot of the Chamber of Commerce building, which was probably like a 5-story-ish building, and Olympic Park is on the other side of all of that. Earlier in the week, there was a delivery of a big freezer to the building we were in, because it was hosting some of the other countries had their like little offices were set up in there. So someone delivered this freezer full of, so they could put food in it for 2 weeks, and just dropped it kind of in the parking lot. Prior to the Olympics, a flight from New York to France had been shot down over the skies, right? Or it blew up, but there were plenty of reports that people saw something heading towards the plane. And so there was a lot of terrorism talk leading up to those Olympic Games. So when that freezer dropped and made a very loud noise, everybody in the truck was like, oh my God, what was that? Like totally freaked out. So now fast forward, here we are taping this segment, and there's this loud bang. Working with this. And in a nanosecond, you're like, is that a freezer? And then the production truck shook from the concussion from the bomb, right? So our set was looking out over the park, and we had high-powered TV cameras, 3 of them, up there on the set, and Chris Myers is our host.
Terrence Cawthon, he's the guy that Joe Frazier has worked with in Philadelphia, barely advanced rock fight. Mongolian opponent in the second round. Cawthon hung on for a 10-9 win.
And we heard the explosion, and then seconds later, probably instants later, felt the explosion. Our production truck, which is the size of a tractor-trailer truck, shook.
We're all like, what was that? And Chris is looking out, because we're taping something, so it's not like we're breaking live. And Chris is like, people are running, I don't know, but there's a lot of commotion down there. So we pushed the 3 cameras over to the edge of the set so we can use them to kind of see what's going on. And it probably took 10 minutes before we felt comfortable to go on the air and just be like, something has happened. There was an explosion of some sort. And there, like, my news background kind of kicked in. And we always say, you know, be right, you don't have to be first, but I really wanted to be first. I really, really wanted to be first, because if nothing else, we knew there was an explosion of some kind, and people were leaving, and cop cars and fire trucks and ambulances were pouring into the park. So then it was just, what do we have? What are we dealing with at 1:30 in the morning?
The story eventually throughout the night began to build and build. Each time we went on the air, we had a little bit more of the story to tell and more pictures to go along with it.
Chris would be standing there to do his report, and 25 yards behind him were impromptu medical scenarios, and people were being treated and attended.
You're seeing one of the many ambulances pulling away. Apparently this area that is set up behind us, can we get a shot of this back here? It is not necessarily a hospital area, but it is an area that one of the officials told me they have medical access to. You can see a woman or a person being put on a stretcher here, as a number of ambulances and fire and rescue units have been called to the area.
I remember one time a police car came screaming down the road, and about 10 to 12 police officers went running by and up towards the Georgia Dome. And you don't know what that is. You just know there's a police car whizzing by and cops are running in a direction.
What's going on here? Hey, Grossi, Gus, can you see this? People, I don't know.
It's so chaotic, but what did you learn as a broadcaster from going through that experience and have to kind of piece it together along the way?
Well, as a producer, just maintaining calm and the importance of your communication with your talent. So Chris is up on that set. All he can really do is report on what he's seeing from up there. I've got access to the news wires that are coming across the computer whenever something is coming across. A police officer came up to the set and said to Chris, hey, you guys can't be up here. You got to get down. And Chris said, well, the other guy said we could stay. And the guy's like, oh, okay. 20 minutes later, the guy comes back. He goes, there was no other guy. And there wasn't, but Chris bought us 20 more minutes of that vantage point before he had to go down on the street. But in the long run, being down on the street was better, because now we can talk to police officers. Now we can talk to eyewitnesses. They still came into the truck and told us we had to go. And my boss was like, we're already on the air. So he's like, all right, just anybody who's non-essential, get out. And so, you know, maybe there's a dozen people in the truck. Now we're down to 6. And we ended up doing 20 consecutive hours of live coverage between us and throwing back to, it was Stuart Scott and Reese Davis were supposed to do the 2 a.m. Sports Center that night. So they kind of, when we kind of ran out of things to say, we would go to them, they would fill in the blanks, they'd come back to us. But we had the recording of the explosion because we were taping at the time. So when in doubt, it was like, If you haven't heard it, this is what it sounded like at 1:20 a.m. and we just play Chris talking over a boxing score panel, and then you hear how loud the explosion was. So, trying to maintain calm, trying to anticipate where you might be going next. In the aftermath, they were like, well, there could have been another bomb. Like, that never occurred to me, because you just kind of get so into what you're doing in the moment. But then when the Richard Jewell movie came out, Jeff Shetzel and I went, he was working here at the time, he and I went and saw it together. And they did such a great job with that scene and detailing how the backpack got knocked over. The explosion ended up going up instead of going out. And all those years later, that was the first time it occurred to me, hundreds of people could have died on this day. And it obviously would have drastically changed the way I look at that day, because I looked at it as the thing I'm most proud of in my time at ESPN. I got a letter from John Walsh, who ran SportsCenter at the time, complimenting me, and I think he sent it to everybody who was there, but saying, you made us proud today. This was great work. Obviously, if hundreds of people die that day, then it's not the proudest thing that I've ever done, and I look at that. But it took that movie for me to really go, yeah, I'm kind of glad I was there that day, but it could have been a really different thing. But I'm certainly proud of how we performed as a unit that day to cover that story.
Yeah, some of the best work is done in tragic circumstances. We're just glad you and the rest of the crew were safe. That's Gus Ramsey. He is the program director here at the Dan Patrick School of Sportscasting. But back in the day, he was Dan's producer on the 11 o'clock show. What was that like?
Well, there's another moment that's terrifying, right? So Dan and Keith had a guy named Mike McQuaid as their producer for when the big show really kind of started. And Mike and I are completely different people. And he's going to be here this month with a couple other ESPN bigwigs to visit our campus. But that show was established, right? That show was already it. And now I'm coming in because Mike has been promoted, and Dan and Keith have to trust me to not screw up this thing that they've got going. So that was terrifying. It reminded me of when I first was working at WESH as a PA and would have to run prompter for the 6 o'clock news with Steve Rondinero and Andrea Coudrier, who had been there a long time and were very much what you expect news anchors to be. And just like, that's why I always say teleprompter is the scariest job in the building. If you screw up, you feel like everyone's going to scream at you. So now I'm being handed the big show and trying not to screw it up, but also trying to go, all right, are there any tweaks? What can I bring, that might take this up a notch? But it was also when Keith was kind of starting to, Keith could be Keith, right? And he wasn't always happy. And eventually, I only did a year and a half with them because he was on his way out to MSNBC, so he was often disgruntled. But he was a brilliant writer, typed like this, which was really funny to watch. But he could have be mad about something, silent protest. He wouldn't write it'd be like 9:30. He hadn't written a script yet, and my coordinating producer would be freaking out, and then Keith would just be like, "Fine," and in 20 minutes he'd write the whole show, and it was all great stuff. And Dan was, Dan had to counterbalance Keith both in the newsroom and on the air. Mm-hmm. And they had their different personalities. I was telling somebody the other day, when I worked with Kenny Mayne, I would tell the other talent, I don't need 2 Kenny Maynes. I don't need 2 Stuart Scotts. Dan knew we didn't need 2 Keith Olbermanns, but I think that's what made the show work so well, is how they counterbalanced each other. And I learned a lot about producing from those 2 guys. And again, just knowing you're doing the 11 o'clock Sports Center, which is the #1 show. I did it in the summer of '98 when McGuire and Sosa were having their home run race. I did it when Jordan and the Bulls were winning their championships, so the ratings were pretty much through the roof. So again, it was cool to be like, this is the show. People want to, and again, you didn't have internet. People had to turn on the show to find out who won games. People had to turn on the show to find out if Mark McGuire or Sammy Sosa had homered that day. So millions of people are watching the show on a daily basis. So that was that was a lot of fun.
Must-see TV every night. Anybody who did not experience that just was incredible, the home run race, and man behind it making it look good, this guy. And you must have done a pretty good job because eventually...
Well, except on the day that the record was broken.
Go on.
Because we used to use tapes back then, not digital files. And so you would put your slug in the rundown, and the person would write the slug on a piece of tape on the front of the tape. So they would put the tape in the machine. Well, we had Cubs-Cardinals highlight, and then a Cubs-Cardinals sidebar, Jeremy Schaap reporting on the historic day when McGuire breaking the record. Because the slugs were similar, the person in the tape room got confused, and the first thing that rolled was the sidebar and not the highlight. Grand scheme of things, it's not the worst mistake. You know, Mike, I think someone had the wrong winning team for the Super Bowl on the score panel one year. That's a pretty bad mistake. But still, my heart just dropped that moment because I knew the highlight was supposed to come first, which is why we tell the students all the time, make sure your slugs are very different so people can understand. So right up till the record-breaking day, we were doing a good job, and then we tripped across the goal line.
But make sure you all do that, okay? Slugs need to be different enough so that doesn't happen to you. Firsthand experience here. In spite of that fact, you were promoted to coordinating producer, which was a job you had for 15 years. Now you're in management. Take us through those years.
Yeah, that's one of those things where sometimes your boss is going to come tell you they want you to do something. You're going to be like, I don't want to. I didn't want to stop producing the 11 o'clock Sports Center. It was Dan and Kenny Mayne at that time. Rich Eisen and Stewart were doing the overnight show. And I was still having a lot of fun as a producer. I'd only been there, 5 years. I felt like there was still more for me to do producing that show. But they're like, we're giving you a promotion. You kind of have to take this. And it's like, okay, I guess. What am I going to be doing, The lucky part is they put me on Baseball Tonight. And I told people if they had ever said to me, you can only do one thing for the rest of your time at ESPN, what would it be? It would be to be the coordinating producer on Baseball Tonight. So I got to do that. I got to do other sports centers. I got to do College Game Day. And over the years, eventually they put me on ESPN News, and I got to oversee 3 ESPN News shows every day, which I really liked because I felt like I was taking a step forward in terms of management. I started doing a lot of kind of my own talent coaching. I would send out emails to the talent and say, hey, if you got a prep day, which is a day they don't have to do a show, and you want to review tape, I'm happy to go over it with you and try to help you out. And that was, we had hired Kevin Nagandi and Robert Flores, Danielle Sargent, a number of new people. Typically the old guard was like, yeah, I'm good. I don't think Bob Lee would need to really just sit down with me to go over his tapes. But the newer people appreciated it. And so that was starting to kind of whet my appetite with the coaching thing. Eventually they put me on the noon Sports Center, which I was not happy about. I was doing ESPN News. I was impacting multiple people. And I remember the guy, he was relatively new to ESPN at the time. He brought me in his office and he said, hey, we're going to have you be the CP on the noon Sports Center. And I went, okay. And he said, you're not happy? I said, I've done 3 tours of duty on Sports Center. Like, I kind of feel like I've done all I can do there. There's other things I want to do. And he's like, well, it's Sports Center. And not to mention, like, I'd been a night guy for 15 years, and now you're going to have me getting up at 5 a.m. to come. Like, that wasn't anything I wanted to do. But it was a good life lesson for me because every day when I got up to go in and do that show, this was back when I was on Twitter, I would just tweet #SurviveInAdvance as a way to tell myself, like, you're not going to have to do this forever. But it definitely affected my attitude. And when I had my mid-year report, my direct report was like, we're not happy with how you're approaching this job, because I was basically sulking and not putting my best effort into it. I liked the people I was doing the show with, but it wasn't what I wanted to do. And I let that get in the way of how I was performing professionally. And I'm like, you're right. I've been a baby about all of this. I'll be better. And I did turn that corner. Yeah. But again, it's one of those things that's going to come up in your career where you could be at a place like ESPN for 20 years and still not necessarily be doing things that you want to do all the time. But you have to find a way to make it work.
The work never ends, everybody. The work never ends, and there's never a time when something negative happens that you can't transform it back into a positive from learning a lesson from it, right? That's why we give you guys feedback. That's why we teach you. We all learn every day. All of us who are teaching you, we're learning new stuff from you. So it's fun for us, but great point, Gus. When you look back at the ESPN experience, you know, sometimes when you're in the moment, you're in the moment. But now you've been away for a little while. How would you kind of sum up the Gus Ramsey ESPN experience?
Well, you know, it's when I raised my family at the same time, and I think a lot of people when they get to ESPN, depending on where you are in your life, like I got there, I was 25. It was easy for me to think like, I'll be here until I retire. And you're owned by Disney. You get to, you know, free tickets to the park, half off the hotels, and there's a lot of great benefits from that. And so when you're raising a family at that time, I had no desire really to do anything else. I did interview with SNY when they first started, and they paid, that was the year they got Carlos Delgado and Billy Wagner, so I guess the Mets spent all their money on those guys instead of me that year. But I mean, I certainly look back at it fondly, and it's, you know, the opportunities that I had there were pretty remarkable. Again, going to that Subway World Series, doing Baseball Hall of Fames. I was there for Cal Ripken and Tony Gwynn's induction. We produced that event. And I remember we'd have meetings on Fridays to talk about the whole procedure and whatnot. And afterwards, Cal Ripken comes up to me and he goes, "Hey, I want to do this thing where I'm going to act like I'm going to take a rose out of my jacket, and I'm going to act like I'm handing it to my wife, and then my son is going to have a rose and he's going to hand it to her. Can you cut cameras in a way that'll make it look like sure, Cal,
wow.
we can make that work." And Tony Gwynn was so nervous that morning. Tim Kirchin saw his son in the hotel lobby like at 9:30. He goes, "How's your dad doing?" He says, "Well, he just had a beer and he doesn't drink." Right? So to think that like Tony Gwynn was freaked out, you know, about that, you know, those are those cool experiences that you look back and go, that was pretty awesome. The last year, I knew I was doing it 2007. I told my dad, I'm like, this is my last year on Baseball Tonight. This is the last chance I'm going to get to do this. You gotta come. So he flew in from California. The Friday night, they have a big party in the Hall of Fame for the Hall of Famers and some select media. So my dad and I are in the Hall of Fame, surrounded by all the living Hall of Famers who've come back, and it's Ripken and Gwynn are going in, so it's the biggest returning class they had ever had. There were like 60 guys. We're standing there. There's Carlton Fisk, there's Yogi Berra, there's Sandy Koufax, there's Tom Seaver, right? And so we knew Tom Seaver from our time in Greenwich, so we went over and chatted him up for a while. My dad hadn't seen him in forever. And we stood and took a picture in front of Tom's plaque there in the Hall of Fame, me, Tom, and my dad. And afterwards, I called my wife and I said, "Hey, great news is we got our Christmas picture. Bad news is you and the boys are not in it." You know, but so those kind of experiences, that's why when I got laid off, I went home that day and I wrote a blog post expressing my thanks to ESPN. I remember I said I could have blown them up. There's lots of things I could have been bitter about. I was still a good employee. I was still getting good reviews. But I wrote a blog post expressing my gratitude for the experience that I had there, the people I got to meet, the things that I got to do. And, you know, I put it on Twitter to my 3,000 followers or whatever, but then Bill Simmons and other people are retweeting it. And next thing I know, it's being quoted in the Washington Post and some of these other places. And if nothing else, I'm proud that in that moment I was able to say my life would not be the same if these people didn't give me a job. And I'm glad I remembered that. And I'm glad that I can look back at it now and be proud of the time there and proud of, you know, how I exited.
That's wonderful. And what a great father and son moment to have, you know, during your later years at ESPN. I want to touch on your family more in just a second, but you reminded me of that Tom Seaver story from your childhood. I forgot to mention that earlier. You had a childhood opportunity to catch Tom Seaver?
Yeah, so, I mean, I told you I've been a little starstruck in my life. Seaver lived in Greenwich, and when my dad was the athletic director while Tom was still playing, in the wintertime, he would come over to get the keys to the gym so he and his buddies and some of the faculty would play pickup basketball as a way to kind of stay in shape. So after he retired in the summer of '87, my dad was very much into baseball memorabilia at the time. So he reached out to Tom, and they were doing a deal where they would advertise in the trade magazines that you mail something in and Tom Seaver will sign it and we'll send it back to you. And Tom and my dad would split the proceeds because my dad was handling all this stuff. Well, the Mets pitching staff had a number of injuries, and Seaver had pitched in '86. So they reached out and like, if you're interested, we'd like you to try to come back. We could use you this year. So one day, Seaver shows up at the house for a signing session with his glove, and he goes, the Mets have asked me to try to come back. I need someone to throw to. And he asked my dad. My dad's like 52 at the time. My dad's like, I don't think I'm your guy, but Gus would probably do it. He looks at me, he goes, you up for this? I'm like, gee, Tom, let me check my busy home from college schedule. Yeah, I guess I could work you in. He's like, all right, we're going to sign, and then when we're done, we're going to go out in the front yard, and I'll throw to you. So I go, okay. Go upstairs, I call Bill Simmons. I said, hey, Bill, in about 20 minutes, I'm going to be catching Tom Seaver in the front yard if you want to come over. I think he was in my driveway before I hung up the phone. So we go out there, and I'm in like Zubas and flip-flops. I got my first baseman's glove because it's the biggest glove I had. And he starts to throw, and he's like, here comes my slider. I'm like, what's that gonna do? Right? And, you know, I'm starting over here, and I'm catching it down in front of my right foot. And at that point in his career, he also kind of started throwing this lollipop curveball kind of pitch. And about halfway through, Bill says, Tom, do you mind if I just stand there and give you a batter in the box? And he's like, no, great, get on in there. So he throws a few of those lollipop curves, and Bill goes, I think I could hit that. And Tom goes, you do, great, stay right there. Fires a fastball about 10 feet behind Bill's head. I'm chasing after it, giggling the whole way. He's like, that's what you get when you're looking for the curveball. And then I went over to his house 3 times and caught him over there as he was working up. And my friends were like, how's he throwing? He's the best I've ever caught. Like, he's better than David Solomon in 9th grade, I'll tell you that much. And then he went down to St. Lucie to their spring training facility and pitched a simulated game. And the Mets backup catcher, Barry Lyons, went 6 for 6 off of him. And Tom's like, I'm done. But my dad got a hold of the agent and got the jersey that Seaver wore in that simulated game and gave it to me.
No way.
So I have the last jersey that Tom Seaver ever wore as a Met. So, yeah, but I mean, just pick an idol, whoever you loved as a kid, and imagine that you get to have that kind of interaction with him. It was ridiculous. He sent me a ticket for when they had Tom Seaver Day when they retired, his number at Chase Stadium and all that. And when I would see him in Cooperstown, I'd be like, "Hey, your favorite catcher's back in town," you know. And
that's great.
But so yeah, he was wonderful, and spending that time in Cooperstown with my dad that night, like that was the best gift I ever could have given my dad, you know. And so. That was cool to get to do that.
And what a great gift he gave to you to give you Tom Seaver right in your yard, right? And now you have 3 boys of your own. Now you get to raise them and enjoy your time with them. You know, looking back, your relationship with your dad now, you're the one in charge. What's that transition been like?
It's a lot of learning. You know, I always thought I was going to be a good dad when I was young, and then you become a dad, and you go, oh, this is what this entails, right? And I always say the hardest thing I think about being a parent is seeing the stuff in your kids that you know they got from you, that you can't be too critical of them about or punish them or whatever, because they're doing that because they got it from you. So they're all wonderful, and obviously I love them, and they're all great people, but they, you know, I probably could have been better as a father over the years. But also, again, it goes back to what the business was. I was, you know, they were coming home from school around the time I was going into work. So weekends were the time to take them to the park, go to their baseball games, take them to Mets games. Like I tried to cram in as much as I could on Saturdays and Sundays, because Mondays through Fridays was a lot of time where we wouldn't see each other. But I know that they look back on their youth fondly, and to me that was the big thing. I was so lucky to have such a great childhood, And when I go to like my reunions at Greenwich Country Day, I'm always like the most emotional one. I'm always the one talking about how great it was. But I grew up on that campus, so that school was more than just a school to me. It was my home. And it'll be other people in the class who will remind me, like, it wasn't great for everybody.
Sure.
7th, 8th, and 9th grade could be hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I do have to be mindful of that, but that's kind of what made me want to make sure that my kids had a childhood that when they look back and go, man, I was so lucky to be able to do all these things. I think the funniest thing that ever happened was when Jack, my middle son, was probably like 12 or 13. He knows who I know, right? He's hanging around. I'm at ESPN. He knows I know all these people. And he goes, Dad, when you die, can I have the contacts in your phone?
I haven't heard about that in a will before. That's an interesting way of looking at things. Well, you're someone who's not only gotten to live the one dream, you've gotten to live two dreams. And after your time at ESPN, we were all blessed that you came to us here at Full Sail University. But I know it's been a dream for you too. What's it been like to live dream number two?
Well, it's funny. I can't say it is a dream because I never would have dreamt of it. Right? At no point in my life was I ever like, gosh, I hope someday I get to create a college degree program out of thin air and change people's lives. So I don't think of it in that way. And when I first got the job, I would often tell people, like, it's the dream job I never could have dreamed of, right? So I don't necessarily think I'm living the dream per se. And, I'm also a lot closer to the end of my career than I am to the beginning. But I am certainly grateful for the opportunity that Dan provided me. Again, networking, right? If I'm being honest, I got this job because Dan liked me, and Dan trusted me to come down here and be his boots on the ground, as he likes to say. So I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that I didn't have to try to scramble at age 49 to find the next thing. I did 6 months at WWE, which was cool. I thought that's where I was going to go. But I remember thinking, like, if I was a dentist in Winter Park and my practice wasn't going well, I could move to Des Moines. They probably need dentists in Des Moines, right? But I don't know how many other places need coordinating producers. So I wasn't really sure I figured I'd go to MLB Network or something like that. So, but I was doing my talent coaching already.
Yeah.
So the idea of doing something that took what I was doing with talent coaching and expanding on it was really cool. Moving back to Winter Park made it easier, right? It wasn't something unknown. It wasn't going to be scary in that way, having to pick up my family because I knew the town.
Yeah.
I knew people from Rollins who were still here. I knew people from WESH who were still here. There were ESPN people who were working at Golf Channel that I knew. So there was going to be a lot familiar about it. I like familiar. I don't like the unknown. The unknown was, what the hell is a program director? All right, what am I supposed to do with this job? And then you come in and you go, all right, well, you got to create this thing. And Dan and Josh Moore had kind of put something in place of what it could be. But it wasn't until I started interviewing the people for the staff that we really figured out what the classes were going to be. That was the cool part. That was like producing all over again, taking a blank slate and going, okay, here's what we want to do with this. So, it's not a dream per se, but I'm very aware of a cool opportunity. And I like to give this message to students, especially those who are younger. When you're young and you're living your life and you're doing cool things with fun people, most of the time you're not aware how lucky you are in the moment.
Yeah.
Right? I look back at my time at WESH and go, man, I was so lucky to work with Scott Hansen and Wendy Chioggi and the people who were there who helped me learn as a producer. And man, when I look back at my time at ESPN, the friends that I made there, whatever. But in the moment, you're just doing your job, you're living your life, you're raising a family. It wasn't until this job, about 2 years in, when everybody had been hired and we got the program off the ground and we started to kind of cook with gas, that I was like, I am so lucky to be right here, right now with these people. And I'm glad that I have the awareness now because I'm older to recognize it. Most of the time when you're young, you won't recognize it. It'll be something you look back on. We had the one big class when they were in here and they were doing their mic drop moments with you. where they were very aware of what a cool experience they got to have as a group together, and I was so happy for them that they knew it then. It's not going to be 10 years from now when one of them goes in the Hall of Fame that they all come back and go, that was great back then, wasn't it?
Right.
They knew it then, and I'm glad that I've had the awareness as we were getting this program off the ground that I was in the middle of something like that.
Gotta tell you, I'm feeling that right now, Gus. This is a special time for all of us here today. And if any of you got any questions, one more chance to do that right now. You coming up? All right. Chris, you got it? All right, go ahead.
Thank you guys for this. This has been amazing. I've learned so many different things. Thank you guys for sharing all your experiences. Obviously, you're a big Broncos fan. You're obviously familiar with a guy named Tim Tebow, right?
Yes.
So I'm trying to become a sports commentator, and I also want to find a way where I can show I love Tim Tebow because he's very open about his faith, and but he's respectful about it. Like, he's not arguing with anybody about it. He's just presenting what he believes in while also giving his commentary on the game. So I wanted to ask, how can I find a balance in that?
Yeah, we've had a few students come through the program who are in that lane. And I think it's an interesting one. If you can, like, there was one guy who was taking quotes or proverbs from the Bible as a leaping off point to a talking point about sports. And he found a way to say, John said this, blah, blah, blah. And in the Bears game this weekend, we saw the need to blah, 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 blah. And so I thought that was a cool way to do it. I thought it was something that could live on YouTube, could live on social channels. It's not going to work in local TV. You don't get to go on local TV and preach your faith as part of what we do. But I think there are avenues out there where you could do that and make an impact.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great question.
Hello again. Much like he said, thank you guys so much for doing this. This has been wonderful. So, behind the bag, it gets through Buckner.
Yeah.
Here comes Night in the Mets win it. It's one of the most iconic sports calls of all time. Based on the timeline you talked about today, it seemed like you were around most of the ages of these guys when that happened. What do you remember about that time in that series from back then when you were a fan watching it versus what do you remember about it now that you've had so much experience in the sportscasting world? How do you remember it differently now that you did back then?
So then I was at Rollins College, and I was in the TV room, right? Because we didn't have TVs in our rooms. There was a common room that had a TV in it. Whenever there was a big game, if there were girls in there watching, we would go in there with Garcia Vega cigars and start smoking to get them out of the room. But I'm in there watching the game with my roommate, my buddy Troy Bellamy. And you ever heard of a game called Stratomatic Baseball?
I love that game. I have it at my house, actually.
So on the cards, there's something called a catch X.
Yes.
Which, if depending on the roll of dice, could be a wild pitch or a pass ball. So the runner is on third base, and Mookie's up, and I turn to Troy, and I go, I really need a catch X right now. And 2 pitches later, the ball goes past the catcher, and the game is tied. And then when the ball gets behind Buckner, I remember just getting up and kind of running crazy circles around that room and yelling and screaming. And then like trying to get to the phone to call my dad and be like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. The other thing is, at that time, Bill Simmons is my best friend, right? And so now I've got to, thankfully there are no cell phones, right? Because we were talking before about how we hate when someone texts us after bad losses, like, oh man, tough loss. Like, I 100% would have texted him, sorry bro, bad loss. And he probably wouldn't be friends anymore. Now I look back on it, and I just like to admire Vin Scully in the moment. I was never really a big Vin Scully guy when I was in my 20s and 30s. Like, I thought he was good, but like to me, he was almost too polished. We had different kind of broadcasters who did Mets games. Now I look back at and I appreciate how he built the drama of that inning, how he shut up when the winning run scored. He didn't talk for like 2 minutes as the cameras were cutting around Shea Stadium. So now I look at it more from the TV broadcast standpoint. But but probably once a year, I'll put that game on and I watch it, and I still get goosebumps every single time.
That's fair, and as a Red Sox fan, it's okay.
You guys have had your moments.
You've recovered nicely.
I have. Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Yep.
Yeah, it's all about those big moments. All right, we got a couple more questions. Come on up.
You talked a lot earlier about jumping with different companies, but also at each company. ESPN, for example,
Yep.
you would jump from like overnight to 6 p.m. How mentally did you like kind of adjust to each kind of assignment? Yeah, and then each company, and then what advice can you give to us to kind of work through that?
Yeah, well, if nothing else, now you have us telling you that this is how it's going to go. Nobody told me that. I just knew I was going to go work at ESPN and produce a show that came on at 2:30 in the morning. No one told me in 7 months we're going to put you on the 6 o'clock show. Then we're going to move you back. The show's going to be on at 2 a.m. Then you're going to do the 11. Then in a few years you're not ready for that. So a lot of it is just that willingness to go, what's next, right? What do you need me to do now kind of thing. It's no different than if I was working at Dunkin' Donuts and they were like, we need you to work mornings for the next month. And when I was at WESH, they had me produce the Sunrise Sports, Sunrise News 1 week, which was done out of their Daytona Beach studio, and it came on at like 6 in the morning. So I'm driving from Winter Park to Daytona at midnight that entire week. I never even asked them for a hotel or anything. So after the newscast every day, I'm driving home and half falling asleep on I-4. It's amazing I didn't drive off into a ditch. But it's just what they asked me to do. So I think the big takeaway is just this business is never constant. You will constantly be asked to do different things at different times of the day. It might be, you could be the sports guy working in Iowa, and if there's a snowstorm, they're going to ask you to cover the snowstorm. The people here, a hurricane comes, there's no sports. You're going to have to get out there and cover people trying to find food at a shelter or something. You just have to be versatile and understand this is what jobs are. Your boss is going to ask you to do stuff, and you're going to have to do it.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, one more question.
Hey, Mr. Ramsey, how are you?
Good.
So I remember you were specifically talking about the challenges that you had to face from ESPN and Rollins College. The ability to work under pressure. In this case, for you, how important was it for you to get stronger at working under high pressure situations?
Yeah, it was huge because that's part of the day-to-day job, right? And in a lot of ways, my experience at WESH producing news helped me greatly with that because there's always an urgency to a newscast. There always feels like there's breaking news going on. And I knew nothing about producing news when I started. So there was already built-in pressure of just, when are they going to figure out I'm a fraud, right? When are they going to figure out I have no idea what I'm doing right now? Same when I got to ESPN. I thought sooner or later they're going to go, who said this guy could produce a show? Why is he here? So you're always feeling like, at least I was for a long time, I would say it took me 5 years at ESPN to feel like, all right, I got this and people know I got this. So there's different kinds of pressure. So there's the pressure you're going to put on yourself to be good. There's the pressure that the job is going to ask of, this thing just happened and we got to lead with it. We got to get on the air in half an hour. And then it swings the other way. I didn't like the boring days. I wanted something to happen because that was more fun for me as a producer, to react and do a show that's kind of flying by the seat of our pants. People used to applaud in the newsroom when a no-hitter would get broken up like in the 7th or 8th inning. Why? Because they didn't want to have to change their rundown. They didn't want to have to change the show because they were just like, we're set in our ways. This is the show. Let's do it. And I was always like, so you're rooting against history? The show's better if this person gets the no-hitter. And by the way, we're probably leading with it now anyway because they got close to a no-hitter. So part of it is just that comfort level and that experience. And you're new in the program. The guys who are further along in the program will tell you you're always going to have nerves. You're always going to be a little wound up. But the more comfortable you are in knowing that you can do the job, it makes it easier. There were still days I was nervous doing a sports center after I'd been there 10 years. But I knew I could do it, and I knew I had a good team around me. So that's why I always say immerse yourself in the stuff that we're teaching you. Master editing, master writing good scripts, master your vocal stuff. So when you get to the end and you're in Rishi's class and you have to do a 15-minute show, that shouldn't take you 4 hours to edit that. That should take you 2. Now you got 2 extra hours to work on your writing, to get a good night's sleep so you can come in and do a good show, whatever it is. But a lot of this is you can control. So if you can dominate the stuff that you can control, the pressure now is more just like the nerves of, all right, we're going to be live. Let's hope we don't screw it up, because you don't ever want to screw it up. If you talk to former athletes, and I worked with a bunch of them at ESPN, almost all of them were driven by a fear of failure. That's what motivated them. And that was really the thing for me at ESPN. I didn't want to fail on a national stage. I didn't want people in the building to be like, oh, that's the guy who screwed up the show last night, right? But eventually you get confident and just, I got this. I bet the first time you drove, you were terrified. You get in a car now, you're probably not too worried about, I'm going to get in an accident because I'm not a good driver.
Well, actually, I've never been behind the wheel.
Okay, well, bad example for you. But for those of you who have, right? The first time you went down a slide as a kid, terrifying. Oh my God, jumping off the diving board into your parents' arms who were waiting in the pool. Any of those things, they say, I don't like to fly. I still get nervous when I get on a plane. But I have to put my trust in the pilots, and we land, and I go, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah, and the fear is never going to fully go away, but it's the repetitions and the preparation that'll make you feel a little bit better going in.
Well, I also believe from the times I was growing up, especially in my early adult days, it's always best to go into a work environment where you just love coming in every day.
Absolutely.
Because, there are so many people, and sometimes, especially me, growing up, I've gotten confused on, where am I going to go from here after a certain amount of time. And sometimes some people get stuck in, multiple options and, multiple ideas on, where they want to take their career. But I always say, it's best to go after whatever it is you want to go after, because if you love doing what you do, and it's not going to be one of those days where you're going to be stressed out going in. If you love your work, if you love doing what you love on a daily basis, that brings a lot of great days professionally and personally as well.
I think that's why all you came to us, and that's what we want to provide for you. And there'll be some ups and downs along the way, but hey, that's what he's sitting in the seat for, because he went after what he wanted to do, and here he is.
If your career's long enough, you're going to have all of those days. I told you there were mornings where I would tweet survive in advance before going in to do a show that I didn't really want to do. There were other days I parked my car and I ran into the building because I was so excited to get to do the show that day. So it's going to be a mixed bag, but you still have to look at it if you're working in this industry, you probably are living your dream, and there's probably 100 things that you wouldn't ever want to have to do as a job, and you don't have to, right? So you always have to be appreciative of, even for me, producing weekend news. 18-year-old Gus Ramsey never, ever, ever dreamed of being a weekend news producer, but if I didn't take that job, I don't ever get to ESPN. So it's great to have a mindset of here's kind of what I want to do, and here's where maybe I'd like to do it. But that's why I love the map we have out in the hall here. We got people working in Alaska. We have people working in towns that I had never heard of before, but they're doing the job, and they know it's a step along what hopefully is a long journey.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey.
Great questions, everyone. Awesome work. All right, we're getting close to the finish line, but I got 2 more questions about the program. Number 1, you and I and Jeff Schetzel were here at the beginning when we were just a bunch of ideas, and then now you see where we are now. What's it been like to see that transformation from ideas to execution to jobs and success?
Like I said, it's not something I ever dreamed of or could have imagined, and certainly I needed all of you guys to help make it a reality. I think the fun part in the beginning was kicking around what it could be, right? Like the organic stuff, like with Gordy's class. It's you know what? They all need to do a live shot talking at the same time, standing right next to each other with people bothering them, because that's what the job is. And I think once we kind of settled in on let's not try to teach per se, let's try to experience. And we all kind of thought what did you go through in your career? What were the things that you had to do? You know, in PNP4, or no, PNP2, when they do the activity about here's your Friday night football games, try to map out which of these 4 games you would go to and have an understanding as to why. That's what's going to happen to you when you get out there. So that was the fun part, and I say it all the time. I've learned more about this business and TV in my time here than I did in my 25 years working at it before, because I never was really on camera. I never was a director. I didn't write promos like Mike wrote. I didn't think about vocal stuff. So to be surrounded by these incredible talent of instructors has been a blessing, because I've learned, there's so much stuff that I learned that I now use in my talent coaching business.
Wow.
Like, I'm a 10 times better talent coach now than I was when I first started it, because of the things that I've learned from everybody. So there's 2 layers to it. To your question is, it was so much fun putting it all together and kind of experimenting. And the early classes, like, we told them, like, hey, you guys are guinea pigs. We don't know if this is going to work or not, but we're using you to find out if it does. Yeah. And then on the backside now, to see that it is working, and I get it, it's not for everybody. And I think the hardest part for me is everybody who comes here has a dream. Everybody who comes here, theoretically, like, this is really what they want to do. Now, I don't always see the effort from everybody that matches that idea. And I have to remind myself that everybody's got lives. We don't know what's going on in people's lives, what's getting in the way, right? I be curious, not judgmental. I tend to be half and half when it comes to that, because I'm always like in the mindset of, you're telling us this is your dream, so why aren't you working harder for it? But again, there's lots of mitigating things that go into that. And also, it's not for everybody in the same way. I could never have been a dentist. I could never have been someone who works at IBM. I could have wanted to, but I never would have got there. There are people who go to USC Film School who don't work in film. There are people who go to NYU and they don't get the careers, you know. So that's the hard part, is like, we've built this incredible thing and we know it works and we've had a lot of success, but there are always going to be people who don't get to that finish line for whatever reason, you know. And every month at BTS, I talk about how we're not low-hanging fruit, right? Just because you weren't good in English, math, science, history, just like me, just because you love sports and you love talking about sports, doesn't make this program easy. It's hard. We know it's hard. We built it to be hard, because it's going to be hard when you get out there. And I think we definitely get people who come here just going, I love sports. This is going to be toast. And they find out it's not. And that's hard. I mean, reality is, I'd love to have 100% employment rate in this industry, but we're never going to have that. So, you know, we're talking about living a dream, but not everybody's going to get to live the dream that they walked in the door here with, for a myriad of reasons. And that's, you know, you wish that could be better. But the overall experience, I think we've created something of value, and it's a really cool experience, and it's why when people are in your class and they do the mic drop, pretty much every month, someone's crying, someone's talking about it changed their lives, someone's going to talk about how halfway through they were going to quit, and they got a pat on the back, or somebody, a classmate, a teacher, whoever, told them just to hang in there. It's every month, you know. And so part of me is really proud that we've created something that lifts people up and gives them hope that they can do this thing that they've dreamed about.
I think you just answered my next question, but I'll ask it anyway, just in case it's different. What are you most proud of about what we've accomplished so far?
Certainly the people who are out there doing it. I think it's great for the students who are here now to look and go, look at all these people. You know, in the beginning it was just an idea and kind of a wing and a prayer. You know, I don't know that we knew what it was going to turn out like. I don't know how much success. I think we were all confident that we had the right approach and that the things we were teaching were both good, some universal, some unique to this school and this program. So the number one thing is that people are out there doing it, and that bosses look at them and go, I want more of them, and that there are stations around this country that have hired multiple of our grads, and that they're out there being successful, and they recognize that a large part of their success is what they learned here.
Final big question. What are your future dreams for yourself and the program?
Well, I dream of retiring someday, but always being connected to the school. You know, it'll always be a part of me. Down the road, I'll be happy to hop on Zooms and visit classes and things like that. The program, I think we're in a place where it's going to evolve. When we started it, it was very much, let's approach it like we're trying to get people jobs in local television. I'm going to guess fewer than half of our students come here now wanting to work in local television.
Yeah.
So there's going to have to be a bit of a shift, a little bit of evolving in what we teach, so that people can get these jobs in social world, in digital world, whatever it is. You know, that map is going to change, right? If we only had pins in the maps for people who are working in TV, and then another map for people who were working, doing something because of what they learned here, but not in TV, eventually that map is going to have more pins in it. In part because the industry is changing, you know, and some of those jobs are going to go away. But I think going forward, there's going to have to be growth in terms of how we're looking at what media looks like and how we can help these people continue to get jobs in it.
Sounds like a plan. Well, we got one final thing that we like to do here. We call it the dream sequence. So I'm going to throw some quick fire questions at you. You ready for it?
Sure.
All right. You are an actor. Dream leading role in any movie. You get to pick it. It can be something that has not been created yet. Where is it?
Jimmy Chitwood in Hoosiers.
Wow.
Yeah, let me be the guy who hits the game-winning shot.
You'll make it?
Oh, every time. Every time. Yeah, that movie came out at just the right time for me, you know, coming off a good high school basketball career and seeing that movie. And yeah, there's lots of sports movies that I love, but Jimmy Chitwood in Hoosiers, that was a role I could see myself in, for sure.
All right, I've never done this to this extent before, but I'm going to give you a full Mets starting lineup, 1 through 9. You can give me whoever you want, past or present.
Okay. Well, Seaver's my starting pitcher. Piazza's my catcher. John Milner is my first baseman. He was my favorite. You know, in the 70s, when you asked somebody who's your favorite Met, it was always other than Tom Seaver. John Milner was the Mets first baseman. Cool dude. They called him the Hammer, which is my PlayStation handle. I'm the Hammer 28 because he wore number 28. Second base, I'll go Edgardo Alfonso. Shortstop, I'll go Lindor. Third base, David Wright. Outfield, Strawberry and Wright. Who else we got out there?
We got Mike Stanton in the audience enjoying every minute of this.
Cleon was my brother's favorite player. I'd probably put him in left, I guess. I got to put Mookie in center. Mookie's probably the most beloved Met, and I'll take Edwin Diaz and the trumpets coming out of the bullpen.
That's good. That was quick too. You did it. You were all over that one.
Well,
just like Jimmy Chitwood.
It could have been really boring TV.
It could have been.
Like when
I took a risk. I knew you'd deliver.
It's like when radio guys ask trivia questions, and then you just hear like 30 seconds of, oh man, that's. It's like, this isn't good radio. Like, can we move on?
All right, finally.
Yeah.
Full Sail reunion. All our grads come. What's the theme?
This is going to take some time. Full Sail, the theme for the Full Sail reunion, like Enchantment Under the Sea.
Whatever you want to say, you can take it wherever you want to go.
All right, the theme is Embrace the Stupid.
Oh, that'll be good.
Yeah, we will have all kinds of stupid stuff. We all know Chris loves to come in here and play his games and do things with the students, so we'll have a bunch of that, and we'll just talk about ways to be stupid in television and radio and everything else, because it's, like I said, it's fun, and that's what really I mean by embrace the stupid is embrace the fun. Like, you just gotta go for it. You gotta do stuff that's gonna make you laugh. Hopefully it makes your audience laugh, because at the end of the day, you're gonna go home and go, that was a fun day today. So we will have a reunion where the theme is embrace the stupid, and then people can come up and give me a hug and go, see, I'm embracing the stupid.
That sounds fun, doesn't it? Doesn't it? Well, I'd like to thank our live studio audience. Give yourself a hand here. And I would like to thank program director, 4-time Emmy Award winner, coordinating producer, and everything else between, great father, great husband, great friend, Gus Ramsey, for joining us here. He's living his dream. All of you, keep on living yours as well.